The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty military base in Afghanistan as Sergeant Jake Martinez walked his usual patrol route. The 28-year-old soldier from Texas had been deployed for 8 months, and the harsh desert landscape had become as familiar to him as his hometown streets. But today would be different from all the others. As Jake rounded the corner of an abandoned building near the base perimeter, he heard something that made him stop in his tracks. It was a faint whimpering sound, barely audible over the desert wind. His military training kicked in, and he carefully approached the source of the noise, hand resting on his weapon. What he found behind a pile of rubble would change his life forever. Huddled together in a makeshift den created by fallen concrete blocks were 4 tiny German shepherd puppies, no more than a few weeks old. Their eyes were barely open, and their small bodies were trembling from cold and hunger. Jake's heart sank as he realized these little creatures were completely alone, with no mother in sight. The puppies were in terrible condition. Their ribs showed through their thin fur, and they were covered in dirt and dust from the harsh environment. One of the smallest pups could barely lift its head, and Jake could see that without immediate help, these innocent animals wouldn't survive another night in the desert. Jake looked around desperately for any sign of the mother dog, but she was nowhere to be found. Perhaps she had been scared away by military activity, or worse, something had happened to her. Either way, these 4 helpless babies were now completely dependent on him for survival. Without hesitation, Jake carefully gathered the weak puppies in his arms. They were so small and fragile that he was afraid he might hurt them just by picking them up. The largest puppy, despite being weak, managed to look up at Jake with trusting brown eyes that seemed to say, "Please help us." Jake knew he was breaking military protocol by bringing animals onto the base, but he couldn't leave these innocent creatures to die. As he cradled the puppies against his chest, he felt their tiny hearts beating rapidly, fighting for life. In that moment, something deep inside him awakened, a protective instinct that went beyond his duties as a soldier. The other soldiers on base would think he was crazy for risking his career over 4 stray dogs. But Jake didn't care. He had seen too much death and destruction during his deployment. Here was a chance to save lives instead of taking them, to create something beautiful in a place filled with so much pain and conflict. As he walked back toward the base, the puppies settled against his warm uniform, finally feeling safe for the first time in their short lives. Jake whispered soft words of comfort to them, promising that everything would be okay now. He didn't know how he would manage to care for them or what challenges lay ahead, but he was determined to give these babies the chance at life they deserved. The base gates came into view, and Jake took a deep breath. He was about to begin an incredible journey that would test his resourcefulness, challenge military regulations, and ultimately transform both his life and the lives of 4 special German shepherd puppies who had already begun to see him as their savior. Jake's mind raced as he approached his barracks with the 4 puppies hidden inside his jacket. He knew that pets were strictly forbidden on military bases, and if his commanding officer discovered what he was doing, he could face serious disciplinary action. But looking down at the tiny faces depending on him for survival, Jake knew he had made the right choice. His first challenge was finding a safe place to keep the puppies. His shared barracks room was too risky. His roommate would return soon from his own patrol. Jake remembered an old storage shed behind the motor pool that hadn't been used in months. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do until he could figure out a better solution. Moving carefully through the base, Jake avoided the main pathways where officers might spot him. The puppies had grown quiet in the warmth of his jacket, their tiny bodies finally relaxing after who knows how long without proper care. When he reached the storage shed, Jake was relieved to find it unlocked and filled with old equipment that would provide perfect cover. He cleared a space in the corner and gently placed the puppies on an old blanket he found among the supplies. They immediately huddled together, seeking each other's warmth and comfort. Jake's heart ached seeing how vulnerable they were. They couldn't even walk properly yet, stumbling on unsteady legs whenever they tried to move. The biggest challenge now was food. These puppies needed milk every few hours to survive, but there was no dog formula available on a military base in the middle of Afghanistan. Jake racked his brain trying to remember everything he knew about caring for baby animals. His grandmother back in Texas had raised farm animals, and he recalled her mentioning that goat's milk could work as a substitute. Jake approached the base mess hall during the dinner shift when the kitchen staff was busy. He managed to convince the head cook, Sergeant Rodriguez, that he needed some canned milk for his coffee. A white lie that made him uncomfortable, but seemed necessary to save the puppies' lives. Rodriguez, always willing to help a fellow soldier, handed over several cans without asking questions. Back at the shed, Jake faced another problem: how to feed milk to puppies without proper bottles. Using his military ingenuity, he fashioned feeding tools from medical supplies he borrowed from the base clinic. He poked tiny holes in latex gloves and filled them with diluted milk, creating makeshift nursing bottles that the hungry puppies could use. The first feeding was a disaster. The puppies didn't understand what Jake was trying to do, and more milk ended up on the blanket than in their stomachs. But Jake was patient, gently coaxing each puppy to drink. The smallest one, whom Jake had started thinking of as Little Fighter, was too weak to eat much, and Jake worried he might not make it through the night. As the days passed, Jake developed a secret routine. He would visit the puppies before dawn, during lunch break, and late at night after lights out. Each visit required careful planning to avoid detection. He brought them fresh milk, cleaned their makeshift den, and spent precious time helping them get stronger. The puppies began to recognize Jake's voice and would start whimpering excitedly whenever they heard his footsteps approaching the shed. They would crawl toward him as fast as their little legs could carry them, competing for his attention and affection. Despite the constant stress of keeping his secret, these moments filled Jake with more joy than he had felt since arriving in Afghanistan. Jake also had to manage his regular military duties while caring for 4 demanding babies. He was exhausted from the lack of sleep, but seeing the puppies grow stronger each day gave him energy he didn't know he possessed. His fellow soldiers began to notice his frequent disappearances and tired appearance, but Jake deflected their questions with jokes about having trouble sleeping in the desert heat. After 2 weeks of this secret routine, the puppies had grown noticeably stronger. Their eyes were now fully open, revealing beautiful brown and amber colors that sparkled with intelligence and growing trust in their human caretaker. They had started walking more steadily and even attempted to play with each other, though they still tired easily. But Jake knew this arrangement couldn't last forever. The shed was getting cramped as the puppies grew, and the constant worry about discovery was wearing on him. He needed to find a permanent solution, but every option seemed to lead to the same conclusion. He would eventually have to give up the puppies or face military consequences that could end his career. 3 weeks into his secret mission, Jake realized that something extraordinary was happening between him and the 4 German Shepherd puppies. What had started as a simple rescue operation had evolved into something much deeper, a family bond that neither species nor circumstance could break. The puppies had begun to display distinct personalities that delighted Jake during his visits. The largest pup, whom he had named Ranger, was bold and protective of his siblings, always positioning himself between them and any perceived danger. Luna, the only female, was incredibly intelligent and seemed to understand Jake's emotions, often nuzzling against him when he appeared stressed from his military duties. Then there was Scout, who lived up to his name by constantly exploring every corner of their shed home, and Little Fighter, who had defied Jake's early fears by becoming the most affectionate of the group. Despite being the smallest, Fighter would always climb onto Jake's lap first and fall asleep against his chest, tiny paws twitching as he dreamed. Jake had started talking to the puppies during his visits, sharing stories about his life back in Texas, his family, and his dreams for the future. The puppies would sit in a semicircle around him, their heads tilted as if genuinely listening to every word. These conversations became Jake's therapy sessions, helping him process the stress and trauma of military deployment in ways he never expected. The feeding routine had become much easier as the puppies learned to drink from Jake's improvised bottles. They would get excited when they saw him approaching with their milk, their little tails wagging furiously. Jake had also started bringing them small pieces of soft food from the mess hall, helping them transition to solid foods as they grew stronger. But the growing bond came with increased risks. The puppies were getting larger and more active, making more noise during their playtime. Jake had to soundproof their corner of the shed with extra blankets and padding to muffle their excited barks and whimpers. Every day brought new challenges as their needs became more complex. Jake's secret was also becoming harder to maintain. His exhaustion was more noticeable to his fellow soldiers, and his frequent absences during free time were raising questions. Private Johnson, his bunkmate, had started making jokes about Jake having a secret girlfriend somewhere on base. If only he knew the truth was 4 furry babies who had stolen Jake's heart completely. The emotional connection Jake felt with the puppies was unlike anything he had experienced before. When he was with them, the harsh realities of war seemed to fade away. Their unconditional love and trust gave him a sense of purpose beyond his military duties. He had become not just their caretaker, but their father figure in every sense that mattered. One evening, as Jake sat in the shed watching the puppies play together, he realized that they had saved him as much as he had saved them. Before finding them, he had been going through the motions of military life, counting down days until his deployment ended. Now he had something to look forward to every single day, 4 reasons to smile even in the darkest moments. The puppies had also begun showing signs that they considered Jake to be their pack leader. They would follow him around their small space, sleep curled up against his legs when he sat with them, and become restless when he was away for too long. Their bond was becoming so strong that Jake worried about what would happen when his deployment ended. Jake started researching military regulations about pet adoption, hoping to find some legal way to keep the puppies. He discovered that while pets were forbidden on active bases, there were organizations that helped soldiers adopt animals they had rescued during deployment. The process was complicated and expensive, but it gave Jake hope that their story didn't have to end in separation. During his research, Jake also learned about the incredible loyalty and intelligence of German Shepherds. These weren't just any puppies. They were members of a breed known for forming unbreakable bonds with their human families. The connection Jake felt with them was backed by thousands of years of evolution that had created the perfect partnership between humans and dogs. As the puppies approached 2 months old, they had grown into beautiful, healthy young dogs with thick coats and bright, alert eyes. Their personalities continued to develop, and each one showed unique traits that reminded Jake of family members back home. Ranger had his grandfather's protective nature, Luna shared his sister's intelligence, Scout had his own curiosity about the world, and Fighter displayed the same determination that had helped Jake succeed in the military, but with their growth came new challenges that would soon test Jake's commitment to his 4-legged family in ways he never imagined possible. The day Jake had been dreading finally arrived during his 5th week of caring for the puppies. It started like any other morning. Jake woke up early to visit his 4-legged family before breakfast, carrying their morning meal hidden in his kit bag. But as he approached the storage shed, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The door was standing wide open. Jake's heart pounded as he rushed inside, fearing the worst. Had the puppies escaped? Were they lost somewhere on the dangerous military base? But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw an even more terrifying sight. Colonel Harrison, his commanding officer, was sitting on an old crate with all 4 puppies gathered around his feet, tails wagging as if they had known him their entire lives. The colonel looked up at Jake with an expression that was impossible to read. "Good morning, Sergeant Martinez. I believe these belong to you." His voice was calm, but Jake could detect the underlying tension. This was the moment he had feared for weeks. His secret was out, and his military career was probably over. Jake stood at attention, his mind racing through possible explanations, but he knew there was no point in lying. "Yes, sir. I found them 5 weeks ago, nearly dead behind the old communications building. I couldn't leave them to die, sir." His voice remained steady despite the panic rising in his chest. Colonel Harrison studied Jake's face for a long moment, then looked down at the puppies who were now playing with the laces of his combat boots. Fighter, the smallest pup, had fallen asleep against the colonel's leg, completely trusting and unaware of the tension in the room. "Do you understand the regulations you've violated, Sergeant? The potential security risks? The health concerns?" The colonel's questions came rapid fire, each one hitting Jake like a physical blow. "You could face disciplinary action, possibly a court-martial for this." Jake's throat felt dry, but he managed to respond. "I understand the risks, sir, but I couldn't watch them die when I had the power to save them. These puppies haven't hurt anyone or compromised any operations. If anything, caring for them has made me a better soldier." The colonel raised an eyebrow at this claim. "Explain that statement, Sergeant." "Sir, These puppies have given me something to fight for beyond duty and country. They've reminded me what we're really protecting: innocence, loyalty, the right of all living things to have a chance at life. Taking care of them has kept me grounded and focused during some of the darkest moments of this deployment. As if understanding the gravity of the situation, all 4 puppies had gathered around Jake's feet, looking up at him with complete trust and devotion. Luna placed her paw on Jake's boot, while Ranger positioned himself protectively between Jake and the Colonel. Colonel Harrison watched this display with interest. "I've been observing you for the past week, Martinez. Your fellow soldiers reported your unusual behavior, and I decided to investigate personally. What I found surprised me." He paused, reaching down to scratch Scout behind the ears. "These animals are remarkably well cared for and socialized. You've done an impressive job under impossible circumstances." Jake felt a flicker of hope, but he knew better than to assume anything. Military justice could be swift and unforgiving regardless of good intentions. "However," the Colonel continued, and Jake's heart sank again, "we have a serious problem. Base regulations exist for good reasons, and I can't simply ignore what you've done. These animals cannot remain here." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He looked down at the 4 faces that had become his world, at the trusting eyes that saw him as their father and protector. The thought of abandoning them now after everything they had been through together was unbearable. "Sir, I understand. But please don't just throw them back out into the desert. Let me find a solution. There are military animal rescue organizations that help with situations like this. Give me time to contact them and arrange proper care." Colonel Harrison stood up, causing the puppies to scatter momentarily before regrouping around both men. "You have 48 hours, Sergeant. Find a solution that doesn't compromise base security or violate regulations, or I'll have no choice but to remove the animals myself." As the Colonel walked toward the door, he turned back one more time. "For what it's worth, Martinez, what you did took courage. These animals are lucky to have found you. Don't let that luck go to waste." After the Colonel left, Jake sank down onto the crate, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his situation. The puppies immediately climbed onto his lap and surrounded him, sensing his distress. Fighter licked his chin while Luna nuzzled against his neck, their innocent attempts at comfort making the situation even more heartbreaking. Jake had 48 hours to solve an impossible puzzle. He needed to find a way to ensure the puppies' safety and future, while also satisfying military regulations. The clock was ticking, and 4 precious lives hung in the balance. Everything he had worked for over the past 5 weeks was now at risk, but Jake was determined not to give up on his 4-legged family without a fight. The real battle for the puppy's future was just beginning. With only 48 hours to save his 4-legged family, Jake threw himself into research mode with the same intensity he applied to military operations. He spent every free moment on the base computers, searching for organizations that specialized in military pet rescues and international animal adoption. The clock was ticking, and each passing hour brought him closer to losing the puppies forever. His first breakthrough came when he discovered Operation Military Pets, an organization dedicated to helping deployed soldiers bring home animals they had rescued overseas. Jake's hands shook as he filled out their emergency application, detailing how he had found the puppies and the bond they had formed. He included photos he had secretly taken of the puppies growing from helpless babies into healthy young dogs. But the organization's process was complicated and expensive. They needed veterinary records, vaccination certificates, and thousands of dollars for transportation and quarantine costs. Jake didn't have medical records for the puppies, and getting them examined by a veterinarian seemed impossible, given his time constraints and the base's location. Desperate for help, Jake reached out to his fellow soldiers. He had always been a private person, but now he needed support more than ever. He decided to trust Private Johnson, his bunkmate, with the truth about his secret mission. Johnson's reaction surprised him completely. "Dude, are you kidding me? You've been hiding puppies this whole time?" Johnson's initial shock quickly turned to excitement. "That's the coolest thing anyone's done on this base. What can I do to help?" Word spread quickly among Jake's unit, but instead of reporting him, his fellow soldiers rallied around him. Corporal Williams had grown up on a farm and offered to help with basic health assessments of the puppies. Sergeant Davis knew someone who worked with military animal rescues and promised to make phone calls. Even tough-as-nails Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from the mess hall volunteered to help with transportation logistics. The support from his unit gave Jake renewed energy, but time was still working against them. He spent his second night without sleep, making phone calls to rescue organizations around the world, filling out paperwork, and trying to coordinate with veterinarians who could help from thousands of miles away. During this frantic period, something beautiful happened. Jake brought his fellow soldiers to meet the puppies, and the bond that formed was immediate and powerful. Ranger immediately took to Johnson, following him around the shed and sleeping against his leg. Luna seemed fascinated by William's gentle farming knowledge, while Scout attached himself to Davis. Even Little Fighter, usually so devoted to Jake, enjoyed the attention from multiple soldiers. "These aren't just your puppies anymore, Martinez," Johnson observed as he watched Ranger play with his bootlaces. "They're our unit's puppies. We're all invested in making sure they get home safely." The soldiers' involvement made Jake realize something important. The puppies had taught his entire unit about compassion and hope in the middle of a war zone. They had given everyone something positive to focus on, a reminder of the good things they were fighting to protect. The impact went far beyond just Jake's personal attachment to 4 animals. On the morning of his deadline, Jake received a phone call that changed everything. Dr. Sarah Chen, a veterinarian who specialized in military animal rescues, had been working behind the scenes with Operation Military Pets to expedite the puppies case. She had connected with a military veterinary unit stationed at a larger base 2 hours away, who were willing to provide the necessary medical examinations and vaccinations. Sergeant Martinez, Dr. Chen explained over the crackling phone connection, "We've arranged for a helicopter transport to take the puppies to the veterinary unit today. If their health checks go well, we can have them on a transport flight to Germany within a week and from there to the United States." Jake's relief was so overwhelming that he nearly dropped the phone. But Dr. Chen wasn't finished with her good news. "There's something else. A family in Texas has been following your story through our organization's social media posts. They're experienced German Shepherd owners who want to foster all 4 puppies until you complete your deployment. They understand that you want to adopt them permanently when you return home." Jake felt tears streaming down his face as he processed this information. Not only would the puppies be safe, but they would stay together as a family until he could reunite with them. The family in Texas had even agreed to send regular photos and videos so Jake could watch them continue to grow. When Jake shared the news with his unit, the reaction was electric. Soldiers who had become attached to individual puppies were sad to see them go, but everyone understood that this was the best possible outcome. They had all played a part in saving 4 innocent lives and keeping a family together. Colonel Harrison arrived at the shed right on schedule, expecting to remove the animals himself. Instead, he found Jake and his unit preparing the puppies for their journey to safety. The colonel listened to Jake's explanation of the rescue plan, nodding approvingly at the professionalism and thoroughness of the arrangements. "Outstanding work, Sergeant. You've found a solution that serves everyone's interests. These animals will have a good life, and you've maintained the integrity of military operations." The colonel paused, watching as the soldiers said their goodbyes to the puppies. "You've also reminded all of us why we serve: to protect the innocent and preserve hope in dark places." As the helicopter approached to take the puppies to their new temporary home, Jake knelt down for one last moment with his 4-legged children. They sensed something important was happening and pressed close against him, their trust in his decisions absolute and unwavering. The hardest part was letting go. But Jake knew this wasn't goodbye forever. It was just the beginning of a new chapter in their incredible story together. The morning after the puppies left Afghanistan, Jake woke up to an emptiness he had never experienced before. For 6 weeks, his days had been structured around caring for 4 small lives that depended on him completely. Now his routine felt hollow and meaningless. The storage shed seemed impossibly quiet when he walked past it, and even his fellow soldiers noticed the change in his demeanor. But Jake's sadness was mixed with relief and excitement. Dr. Chen had called to confirm that all 4 puppies had passed their medical examinations with flying colors. The veterinary team was amazed at how healthy and well socialized they were, considering they had been rescued from the streets and cared for in makeshift conditions. Their blood tests showed no diseases, their vaccinations were complete, and they were ready for the next phase of their journey home. 3 days later, Jake received the first photos from the Martinez family, no relation, despite sharing his last name, who had agreed to foster the puppies in Texas. The images took his breath away. Ranger, Luna, Scout, and Fighter were playing in a large, grassy backyard, running freely for the first time in their lives. They looked bigger already, their coats shining in the Texas sunshine, their faces bright with health and happiness. Mrs. Elena Martinez, the foster mother, had included a detailed letter with the photos. She described how the puppies had adjusted to their new environment, each displaying the same personalities Jake had observed during their time together in Afghanistan. Ranger had immediately taken charge of protecting the house. Scout was exploring every corner of their property. Luna was demonstrating remarkable intelligence by learning commands within hours, and Little Fighter was showering everyone with affection. "They clearly miss you," Elena wrote. "Fighter especially seems to be looking for someone who isn't here. But they're eating well, playing together and learning to trust us. We're honored to care for your babies until you can bring them home permanently." Jake carried those photos everywhere, showing them to anyone who would look. His fellow soldiers followed the puppies' progress as eagerly as Jake did, celebrating each milestone and new photo like proud uncles. The entire unit had become emotionally invested in the success of this unconventional military family. The weekly video calls became the highlight of Jake's deployment. Elena would position her laptop in the backyard so Jake could watch all 4 puppies playing together. During these calls, Jake would talk to them just as he had in the storage shed, telling them stories about his military duties and counting down the days until their reunion. The most amazing part was that the puppies seemed to recognize his voice, even through the computer speakers. They would run toward the laptop when they heard Jake talking, their tails wagging frantically as they searched for the source of the familiar sound. Fighter would often sit directly in front of the camera, tilting his head as if trying to understand where Jake was hiding. As months passed, Jake watched his 4 rescued babies transform into magnificent young German shepherds. Their puppy clumsiness gave way to graceful strength, their small whimpers became confident barks, and their dependent nature evolved into protective loyalty toward their foster family. But Elena assured Jake that their strongest bond remained with him, even across thousands of miles. Jake's fellow soldiers began planning for his return home, understanding that reuniting with the puppies was his highest priority. They helped him research everything he would need: a large enough living space, supplies for 4 large dogs, training resources, and veterinary care. Some soldiers even volunteered to visit him after deployment to help with the transition. The bond between Jake and his unit had deepened through their shared experience of saving the puppies. They had all learned that military service could involve protecting the innocent in unexpected ways, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with compassion and determination. Jake's story began spreading beyond their unit when Dr. Chen shared updates on Operation Military Pets' social media channels. Thousands of people followed the progress of the 4 Afghan puppies and their soldier dad, commenting with support and encouragement. Many were veterans themselves who understood the special bond that could form between military personnel and rescued animals in war zones. The attention brought unexpected benefits. A pet supply company donated everything Jake would need for 4 large dogs, from beds and toys to a year's worth of food. A dog training expert offered free behavioral sessions to help with their transition to civilian life. Even a home improvement show expressed interest in helping Jake modify his living space to accommodate his large 4-legged family. But beyond all the external support, Jake's relationship with the puppies continued to grow stronger despite the distance. Elena would describe how they responded to letters Jake sent, how they reacted to his voice during video calls, and how they seemed to understand that they were waiting for someone special to come home. The puppies had grown from helpless babies into powerful, intelligent young adults, but their devotion to Jake remained absolute. They were living proof that love and loyalty could transcend distance, time, and even species barriers. With only 2 months left in his deployment, Jake began making final preparations for the reunion that would complete their incredible journey from a war zone to a loving home. But first, he had to survive the longest 8 weeks of his life, knowing that 4 faithful hearts were waiting for him in Texas. The flight from Afghanistan to Texas felt like the longest journey of Jake's life, even though he had made similar trips before. This time was different because he wasn't just returning from deployment. He was going home to reunite with his 4-legged family after 8 months of separation. His hands shook slightly as the plane descended into Dallas, knowing that in just a few hours he would see Ranger, Luna, Scout, and Fighter again. Elena Martinez had planned the reunion carefully, understanding how important this moment was for both Jake and the dogs. She had arranged to meet him at a large dog park outside the city, giving everyone plenty of space for what she expected to be an emotional and energetic reunion. The puppies, now fully grown German shepherds weighing between 60 and 80 pounds each, had no idea their soldier dad was finally coming home. Jake's heart pounded as he drove the rental car toward the meeting location. 8 months was a lifetime in dog years, and he worried that they might not remember him. What if they had bonded too strongly with their foster family? What if the connection he felt was one-sided? These fears battled with his excitement as he pulled into the park's parking lot. Elena was waiting by her van with all 4 dogs on leashes, and Jake's breath caught when he saw them. They were magnificent, powerful, healthy, beautiful German shepherds with thick coats and alert expressions. They looked nothing like the tiny, helpless puppies he had rescued from behind the rubble in Afghanistan, yet everything like them at the same time. Jake approached slowly, not wanting to overwhelm them. But as soon as he spoke their names, everything changed. Ranger, Luna, Scout, Fighter! His voice carried across the parking lot, and all 4 heads snapped toward him simultaneously. For a split second, time seemed frozen as recognition dawned in their intelligent brown eyes. Then chaos erupted in the most beautiful way possible. All 4 dogs began pulling against their leashes, whining and barking with excitement as they tried to reach Jake. Elena, laughing and crying at the same time, released their leashes and watched as 300 pounds of German shepherd launched themselves at their long-lost father. Jake was knocked backward onto the grass as all 4 dogs competed to get closest to him. They covered his face with kisses, their massive paws trampling over each other in their eagerness to reconnect with the human who had saved their lives. Fighter, true to his nature, managed to squeeze onto Jake's chest despite being the largest of the 4, while the others circled around them, whining with pure joy. "They never forgot you," Elena said through her tears. "We could tell them apart because they would all run to the phone whenever it rang, hoping it was you calling. They've been waiting for this moment for 8 months." Jake was overwhelmed by the intensity of their reunion. These magnificent animals, who could have easily forgotten their puppyhood rescuer, had remained utterly devoted to him. Their love was so pure and unconditional that it took his breath away. As he sat on the ground surrounded by his 4 children, Jake realized that this was what coming home really meant. The transition to their new life together was surprisingly smooth. Jake had prepared a house with a large fenced yard, and the dogs immediately claimed it as their territory. But more importantly, they claimed Jake as their permanent pack leader, following him everywhere and positioning themselves around him whenever he sat down. Each dog had developed unique ways of showing their attachment. Ranger appointed himself as Jake's personal bodyguard, positioning himself between Jake and any strangers. Luna demonstrated her intelligence by learning Jake's routines and anticipating his needs, bringing him his shoes when it was time for their evening walk. Scout maintained his curious nature, but always checked to make sure Jake was nearby before exploring anything new. And Fighter, still the most affectionate, insisted on sleeping pressed against Jake's side every night. The 4 German shepherds became local celebrities in Jake's Texas neighborhood. Their story of rescue and reunion had spread through social media, and people would stop to meet the Afghan puppies during their daily walks. Children were especially drawn to them, and Jake discovered that his dogs had gentle, protective instincts around young people that reminded him of their own vulnerable puppyhood. Jake's fellow soldiers visited regularly, maintaining the bonds they had formed during those crucial weeks in Afghanistan. Watching grown military men get emotional while playing with the dogs they had helped save became a regular occurrence at Jake's house. The puppies remembered each soldier, greeting them with special enthusiasm that proved their emotional connections ran deep. Dr. Chen from Operation Military Pets stayed in touch, using Jake's story to help other military personnel navigate the complex process of bringing rescued animals home. She often pointed out that the success of Jake's case proved that the bond between humans and animals could overcome any obstacle when people were willing to fight for what mattered. As Jake settled into civilian life, he realized that rescuing the puppies had changed him in ways he was still discovering. They had taught him about unconditional love, unwavering loyalty, and the importance of fighting for innocent lives regardless of the personal cost. The experience had given him a new sense of purpose that extended far beyond his military service. Jake began volunteering with Operation Military Pets, using his story to encourage other soldiers to save animals they encountered during deployment. He spoke at military bases about the healing power of the human-animal bond, sharing how 4 tiny puppies had given him hope during the darkest period of his life. His message was simple. Sometimes saving others is the best way to save yourself. The 4 German shepherds thrived in their new civilian life, but they never forgot their military roots. They remained disciplined and alert, qualities that made them excellent therapy dogs when Jake began bringing them to visit veterans' hospitals. Patients who struggled with PTSD and adjustment issues found comfort in the dog's calm presence and incredible story of survival and loyalty. Ranger developed into a natural leader among the 4, often organizing their daily activities and maintaining order during their interactions with visitors. Luna's intelligence made her perfect for learning complex therapy routines, while Scout's friendly curiosity helped nervous patients feel comfortable. Fighter, despite his size, remained the most gentle and intuitive, seeming to sense exactly which patients needed extra comfort. Jake's relationship with his 4 children deepened with each passing year. They had saved each other in that dusty storage shed in Afghanistan, creating a bond that transcended typical pet ownership. They were family in the truest sense, connected by shared experience, mutual devotion, and an understanding that they would always protect each other. The story of the soldier and his 4 German shepherd rescues became a symbol of hope for military families everywhere. It proved that love could survive separation, that loyalty knew no boundaries, and that sometimes the most important missions had nothing to do with military objectives. Jake had set out to save 4 helpless puppies, but in the end, they had saved him just as completely. Years later, whenever Jake looked at his 4 magnificent companions, he was transported back to that morning in Afghanistan when he heard faint whimpering behind a pile of rubble. That moment of decision to help 4 tiny creatures had led to the greatest joy of his life. The puppies had grown into powerful, devoted dogs, but more importantly, they had grown into his family. Every evening, as Jake sat in his backyard watching Ranger, Luna, Scout, and Fighter play together in the Texas sunshine, he marveled at the journey that had brought them all home. They were no longer the frightened, starving babies he had found in a war zone, and he was no longer the lonely soldier counting days until deployment ended. They had all become something better together. A family forged by compassion, strengthened by adversity, and united by a love that would last their entire lives. The 4 German shepherds had indeed adopted Jake as their father, just as completely as he had adopted them as his children. In a world too often filled with separation and loss, their story stood as proof that some bonds are strong enough to overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the most beautiful families are created not by blood, but by choice, courage, and unconditional love.